All right, I can't believe I'm going to do this, and there's going to be hell to pay. I'm going to talk about and criticize professional photography associations. Now, I've done this before, and every time I've written about and blog posted about associations, got a lot of hate mail. So before you start hating on me, I want you to have an open mind, and we'll have a rational discussion about some of the points I want to bring up, because I think they're pretty valid. And the reason I'm bringing these up is because somebody asked me recently if they should join a professional photography association. And it got me thinking again as to my own experiences with associations and some of the criticisms I have. So I want to bring those up again. So I do want to be fair, though, and mention that my experiences with professional photography associations were nothing but positive. Some of the best times in my life were when I was a member of the Professional Photographers of Canada and PPA. I was a member for decades. I quit around 2011. Talk about that in a minute and why I quit. I still go to conventions, by the way. One of the reasons I really enjoyed belonging to a professional photography association, we're going way back when I was 25 years old. I started my first studio not even knowing that they existed. 3 years in, I started getting these offers to come out to these day-long seminars or what have you. And I was like, whoa, they have such a thing. And I went, and it just blew me away. So, but the thing is, back in the day, a professional photography association looked and felt different, although the same criticisms would apply, and I could easily overlook them back then. I can't as easily overlook them now for different reasons. I want to talk about them. But back in the day, there was nowhere else really to get magazines, to get education, and to belong to a group. Really, when I went to conventions and seminars, I felt like I was with my people. This is where I belong. And I still feel that way for the most part. But the thing is, I feel that they're not really necessary, and there's this aspect to them that needs to be talked about, and that's what's going to get me in trouble, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So, I have to talk about Dan Kennedy. 1995, I found out about Dan Kennedy, and I signed up for his newsletter, and for decades, I was one of his biggest fans, bought all his books, his educational programs, and his marketing newsletter. Dan Kennedy tells a story of associations when he was starting out as a young speaker back in his early 20s. He was very ambitious, very motivated, and when he joined the National Speakers Association, he thought that he was going to join and finally get the truth, get the path to success. And it was then that he realized that it was all nonsense and there was a lot of BS. Now let me explain. And I'm going to segue that to professional associations and photography associations. So back in the day when he joined, he thought those things, and he quickly realized, because he was already making good money as a speaker, that they were telling him a bunch of lies, really, because these grizzled old professionals were telling him that he had to do this and that and follow X amount of rules, and he had to get out there and struggle for X amount of years and then get certified within the association, yada, 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 yada. But the problem was, at the time, he was already making more money than most of those who were telling him what to do. There's a book that Dan Kennedy talks about called Winning Through Intimidation. Robert Ringer wrote it, and he also wrote Looking Out for Number One. He self-published and self-marketed those. Those were two bestsellers in the 70s. Coincidentally, I read them both, so when Dan Kennedy talked about them, I was familiar. And he talks about the concept that Robert Ringer brings up, and I think this applies to photographers nowadays more so than ever. And it's called the leapfrog theory. And it goes like this. You don't have to line up and follow these rules unless you're like a dentist, a lawyer, architect, financial planner. They have to belong to associations which are largely self-regulated for obvious reasons. But photographers and hairstylists, and if you own a cafe or whatever, there are rules and laws within your city, but there's no need for association rules. We can easily get ahead and succeed on our own. And the benefits of belonging to an association are available to us more so than ever. Think about the amount of Facebook groups out there and the amount of information available on Google and YouTube. And if you want to belong to any kind of a group, there's a ton of them out there. So it's easy to access the information that was so rare and so strictly regulated within these cliques back in the day when I first joined my professional photography association. Again, I want to remind you, I don't have a problem with, and I just want you to become aware of these aspects. And even though I no longer am a member of my professional photography association, I still go to conventions. I pay as a non-member, and I love going to the trade shows, and I love connecting with friends and the fellowship and the events that go on. That's the primary thing that I miss the most. But if you want to become a member thinking that you need to get the education that is available there, you know it's not the only way. As a matter of fact, the leapfrog theory, the thing that makes it work, and it applies to anybody who wants to get ahead in photography, is to have the balls and the eagerness to take action on your own. And you decide to jump to the front, you leapfrog to the front of the line and make things happen. So you don't need an association to tell you to do that. It sounds like I'm criticizing them. Anybody who wants to join, I encourage them to. You will become a better photographer. You will learn a lot. All I want you to realize is it's not the only strict, narrow path. One of the problems with associations is there's too many rules that end up being in place, and these there's a lot of people who end up being autocratic and dictatorial. Dan Kennedy talked about this again in one of the newsletters I was talking about. And when I read this around 2000, 2001, my brain just exploded. I'm like, this is so true. And he was talking about the story I just told you about when he was a member of the National Speakers Association, NSA, and realized what he realized. But he also realized, and he mentioned this in his newsletter, and that's when my head exploded. He said that committees in professional associations like the NSA, and I'm going to say photography as well, and this is where I'm going to get a lot of hate. I'm sorry, but I got to say what's got to be said because it's an ugly truth, but it's reality. Committees are made up largely, not exclusively, because I know there are a lot of really qualified people, photographers who are legit, who are on committees in photography associations. But a large percentage of them are run by people who are not successful, and they like the power, the authority that it gives them over others who are successful. When Dan Kennedy wrote that, and I paraphrase it, but when he wrote that, it was just like, oh, that's so true. That is so true. And it's not like I'm going around hating on it and I'm saying, geez, what, I'm not bitter about it. I don't want to become an old curmudgeon-y guy. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just trying to bring forth light to these ugly truths that are reality. And that's what Dan Kennedy does all the time. The professor of harsh reality is another nickname that's been assigned to Dan Kennedy. But when I read that, it sort of made me feel good because I was like, okay, that explains a lot of what I was not able to reconcile. What is wrong with associations and why I was sort of bothered by them. And I'll give you one example. This is a true story. It actually happened to me. Early 2000s, I was in a print competition. I entered prints and I won my total score. All four prints got accepted. And I was qualified to be the photographer of the year. Now, what happened was there was somebody on the committee who doesn't like me. Whatever, it happens. When I have a disagreement with somebody, if I don't agree with them politically, philosophically, whatever, I don't care. We can have a discussion. We can get along. I'll have an open conversation and I'll be open. But this was just one of those things where this guy didn't like me, and he found a way to get all my prints disqualified. And I recognized it for what it was. I knew what it was, and it was such a silly reason, and I felt slighted at the time, but I got over it in 2-3 days. I was like, yeah, whatever. It is what it is. There's this ugly side to being on a committee or dealing with committees in any way, shape, or form, of which professional photography associations have. Have you ever heard that meme? This was actually a meme before memes were memes. It goes like this: death by committee. You ever heard of that? Well, there's a reason why that meme has got a bunch of truth to it. There's another one. It's a short story. It goes like this: What is a camel? A camel is a thoroughbred racehorse designed by a committee. It's been known throughout the history of mankind that committees are inefficient. They have an inefficiency to them. But if they have a set of rules and some order, like if you're a lawyer, you need to follow the rules. Kind of makes a lot of sense for a lot of these professions. That's where associations apply and are very, very practical. But for photographers, there's this component that I'm talking about. And it's an ugly truth, but it is what it is. So I keep going to associations, and I'm still active in my photography business. We're still doing pretty good. We're pulling out of this pandemic right now. We're getting things back on the rails. And I'm going to put a link in the description below, 2 links to 2 videos, one on what I feel is wrong with the industry today, and the other one is what we did to pull out of the pandemic, after a 3-month lockdown and going from a 6-figure income to 0, and what we did to bring it back up there. So, and again, I don't want to sound bitter. I don't want to sound angry, because I'm not. I'm just talking about the realities behind a professional photography association and how you can apply the leapfrog theory that Robert Ringer and Dan Kennedy talk about. A large part of that is more to do with your ability to take steps, to take action. And it has more to do with having a set of brass balls than it is to following this pre-mandated set of rules and structure that this association has created, usually through a committee, that says you have to follow these rules, whether they are spoken or unspoken, and the only way to get ahead is to do this. I know so many photographers who have succeeded without that. And I also know a lot of photographers who feel the same way I do, but they won't talk about it as openly as I do, about associations. So it is what it is. If you have any comments, put them in I'll read your hate mail. I'll read your love mail. If you agree with me, disagree with me. That's what I got to say about that. All right. Thanks for listening.